They say that love is a beautiful thing, and I honestly doubt if that's accurate or even seemingly true. I've only seen the dark and ugly side of love, and the worst part was that it was my first try. I was born into an overly religious family. They were so religious that they practiced 8 or so religions. And because the fundamental goal of most religions is to achieve purity, they enforced a horde of rules that were dedicated to keeping us pure and on the path of light. They controlled every bloody thing about me. I barely had a life while I was growing up. Every game children played was always demonic and impure, so I was never allowed outside. While kids read comics and played with action figures, I was given the Bible, Quran, Torah, and other religious texts. Instead of toys, I had relics like crosses, stars, rosaries, moon pendants, and a lot of things that would make a gypsy proud. I was a social mess, but not totally, thank God. I had a friend whose parents understood what I was going through, so they helped me with their son. He was the only friend I was allowed to visit, and that was because his father was a youth pastor and his mom a deaconess. But his parents were cool and allowed him to live a normal life, and they also helped me too. When I visited, they would have their son brush me up on the age-appropriate activities. He gave me comics to read, toys to play with, movies to watch, and video games to play. And it was through him that I was different from my family members. I was normal, at least to an extent. Soon after finishing high school, it was time to choose a college. My parents wanted me to go to seminary school like my older brothers and sister, but for the first time in my life, I defied them. I picked a college far from home, so they wouldn't be able to visit without checking in first. And I also wanted to be as far away as possible from their doctrines. College started, and I soon noticed all the attention I was getting from women. They said I was cute. I never even knew. My parents never believed in looks. They said it was vanity, and vanity was an impurity. They only allowed a single mirror in the whole house, and it was in their closet. You needed their permission to use it, and weren't allowed in front of it for more than 30 seconds. It was only to check to see if you were dressed properly, not to check yourself out. Though the girls gave me looks, I couldn't even approach them. I didn't know how. I wasn't allowed to talk to the opposite sex outside of church or the mosque or any spiritual gathering. Talking to them led to lust, and lust led to premarital sex, which was a blemish on the soul. "Are you gay?" one of my classmates asked me one day when I was leaving campus. "What?" I asked him. "How come you get so much attention from girls and do nothing with it?" he asked me. "I don't actually even know how to talk to girls," I blushed. "It's not that hard, especially if they already like you," he said. I must have not looked convinced because he decided to test it out. "Okay, look over at that bench," he said, pointing to a bench with 2 girls on it. One was reading a book and the other was tapping away on her phone. "Go talk to her. Just say your name, tell her hair looks nice, and tell her you want to get her number," he said to me. No, why would I do that?" I asked him. "Hey, just do it, and if it turns out bad, you'll probably never see her again," he said. It was convincing, so I decided to try it. Every part of my body shook as I walked over to the girls. I was terrified as I spoke, but he was right. It worked, and I walked back to him to see his jaw wide open. "Dude, are you crazy?" he asked me. "What?" I asked him. "I did what you said." "I meant for Lauren, not Samantha. She's way out of your league," he said. "But she gave me her number." "I know. I saw. Are you using black magic or something?" he asked jokingly. "No," I laughed, feeling confident about myself. Well, good luck, bro," he said. I called Samantha that night, and struggled with the conversation. But she helped me pull through. And honestly, she was amazing. Aside from being pretty, she was smart and hilarious. And most importantly, she was loving and understanding. I didn't think she thought me weird at all, despite the way I grew up. And I was sure she loved me, just like the way I loved her. She was perfect, and I was happy that I hit it right on my first try. A month passed, and I started gaining the confidence to talk to other girls. Just friendly chatter, nothing more. One day, I was arguing about something with a girl in my class when Samantha came looking for me. I didn't know how long she'd been standing there, but she looked visibly upset. I ended the argument and went to her, but she didn't take her eyes off the girl. A week later, the girl was involved in a freaky accident, and I went to see her in the hospital. I told Samantha before going to avoid any upset and to see if she was fine with it. She told me to swing by her place later, and I did. She cooked for me, and I barely remember taking 3 swallows before blacking out. I woke up what felt like days later in her basement, strapped to a chair. She accused me of cheating on her like her exes. She told me to tell her that if it was the girl that I was arguing with. I denied, and she slapped me. She tortured me with snips, biting away at my skin with its metallic tip. I begged her, told her I was faithful and would continue to be, but she wouldn't listen. She continued torturing me for 3 days without food and water. On the 4th day, I collapsed. Looking at my pathetic state, she got frightened and untied me. She managed to revive me, and I woke up with the intent of escaping or dying. I held onto her throat, and my inner voice told me to kill her. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I pushed her away violently and shakily ran away. Samantha was never caught or seen again. I made up my mind to never love again. It was that what she did to me, that almost killed me, that did it. Never again. I bobbed my head slowly to the music that blasted through the radio as I took a dedicated puff of the cigarette I had in my left hand. She approached the car with a swagger that made my heart skip. It had been 12 years since I had last seen her, my first love. It was her who had done it to me for the first time, and if I were to believe the words she said when she still loved me, it was I who had done it to her for the first time. I saw her smile into the phone which she was craned into, and I shut my eyes. It broke my simple heart to see her laugh so calmly. I had endured 13 years of her torture. 12 of these years you count. I had been away. And for what? I opened my eyes and took another pull off of the stub of my cigarette. The embers came alive and the tobacco caught on with a strong crackle. I felt the heat run into my head and my mouth pooled with spittle. She stopped and looked around. Then she held the phone to her face and spoke into it. I reclined in my seat and looked away. I could barely bring myself to watch her talk like that into the phone when I knew it was a lover she spoke to. Fuck, I growled, biting my lower lip with frustration and balling up my fist into a strong clasp. When I returned my gaze to her, I observed just how much time had passed between us. She was now older than I remembered her to be, but no less beautiful and no less capable of making my heart stop. Her lips were dark shade of maroon, even though I remembered them being paler in our younger years. I sighed. I would never have to remember her again at the end of the day. I would never lose her again. I loved her too much to lose her over again, even though she had hurt me. She moved over to the curb and touched the tip of her shoes over the stony floor. I could sense the fever of her conversation had consumed her and she had no idea of her environment. I unclasped my hand and sighed when it no longer hurt. The object in my clenched fist no longer bore into the tender patch of my palm. She was always so vulnerable. The need surged in my chest, just as I had set out to do. The urgency to protect her from the world, to keep her away from all that could harm her. I desired to keep her for myself. I could protect her. I flushed with a warm sensation and held my hand to the car door and pushed it ajar just as she stepped closer. "Hey," I said when I was fully out of the car. The rancid smell of tobacco evaporated in haste. The soft smell of her skin, the richness of her musk replaced the atmosphere around my nostrils, and my desires grew stiffer. The rush in my veins turned warmer. My fingers twitched with impatience, and I wished I still had a cigarette. "Hey," she said back. With a passive stare, she moved past me. "Elizabeth," I called, more certain than I wasn't. She swirled, lingering gaze boring passion from all those years ago back into my soul. The evening had a higher meaning. The romance of her eyes, hazel heat that made me weak at the knees. She had more hair than I recalled, and they sat so beautifully on her shoulders like the perfect models on magazine covers. "Excuse me?" She arched her brows in question. "Elizabeth," I iterated, shaky from a rush of thoughts that ran my head to tiredness. "Give me a moment, Mark." She spoke into the phone, and my heart snagged in my chest. Do I know you from somewhere?" My lips hung loose when I desired to speak. It was a bad time to reminisce, but I could not help myself as I stumbled back to our first meeting and her effervescence. She still retained the spark, although I could tell time had left its mark on her, as it had on me. She had started to wrinkle just above her lips, which was now fuller. My heart ached for her, and I designed to stop it. "Look, Elizabeth, I still have it," I said, rolling the small pendant in my hands up to her face. She flinched at first and stared at me askance. She ought to have remembered it. It was a gift she had handed to me on the first night we had done it. I had kept it with me all those times, even when I had been sent away. She did, and was immediately white with horror. I smiled. I knew why. "Richard?" she said, and stumbled backwards away from me. "I have a restraining order against you. Stay away from me." I have stayed away for too long now, haven't I? My eyes darted across the street, and I noticed it was a short run before I caught up to her anyway. "You killed both my parents, and you got sent away for murder, Richard. You're the devil," she sobbed, and it broke my heart. "I want nothing to do with you." My ears whirled. The smile washed off my face at the words that struck me so stiffly and made me sick instantly. I had killed her parents because they'd gotten our way. Now, she was doing the same. I could not stand it. "Don't hurt me, Elizabeth. I've carried your cross for 12 years. I got off for good behavior because I want to spend the rest of my life with you," I said as I moved closer. "I don't, Richard. You're evil, and you should rot in hell," she said. I had had enough. She bolted, but I was quicker. But she fell over the hard tar floor with her face first. I rushed over and climbed astride her back, blind with rage as I was all those 13 years ago when I had first arrested her for her sake. I held her head and smashed her face against the floor with all of the strength I had in my arms. Her nose broke first with a riveting crackle, and the thick stream of her blood dribbling from her mouth to the floor filled me with a head rush. I insisted on my action, smashing her face into the ground until there was no strength left in her to resist me. The warmth of her body and the pulsations of blood through her veins intimidated me of her state, and I turned her over. "No one is going to love you like me," I cried when I saw her crushed face.
It took my crush 400 days to notice me. It took him another 400 days to befriend me. The day he summoned the courage to ask me on a date, my joy knew no bounds. My response was as excited as my insides, but no one probably understands how difficult it gets to wait for more than 800 days for something that you spent all those nights dreaming about. The only good thing about the wait was that I got enough time to prepare for my first date with him. He didn't know that, but no one needed to know. I met him in high school. He was that sparkling, nice young man who told the best jokes during English classes. I mindlessly nursed a crush on him since the first time I set my eyes on him. He was the reason I refused every other guy that asked me out and went dateless to prom night. I couldn't risk him misunderstanding my feelings. I was glad that I did. Not only because my heart was his and his alone, but because he asked me out on that first date the day I graduated. As happy as I was, I couldn't tell my parents about the date. There was no telling how freaked out they would be. They already didn't understand why I never went on a date with any guy all through high school. I simply used my best friend as an excuse to evacuate the house that night. But even my best friend didn't know about my first ever date. No one did. The date happened in an exquisite restaurant. I started to wonder if he had been nursing the idea of this date for as long as I did. I knew it couldn't be. During those first 400 days when he didn't notice me, I used to see him with another girl. She was practically the love of his life. He doted on her, bought her flowers, and gave her such magnificent gifts that I started to question his source of income. I was jealous. Unfortunately, the lady died and I saw my chance. I extended my empathy, and that kick-started the 400 days where he befriended me. He looked nervous when he sat opposite me in the restaurant. He glanced over his shoulders a million times and refused to look me in the eye. Irritation clouded my excitement, but I didn't say anything harsh because I didn't want to ruin the day. I gave him my most pleasant smile and held his shaking hands while telling him to place our orders. He stood from the table and approached the counter. I pulled him back and told him to wait for the waiter. My heart did a triple thump. I was as nervous as he was, but not so quick at showing as he did. The waiter arrived, took our orders, and showed up again in little time. He placed our food on the table and disappeared. We ate in silence. I hated that we weren't saying much. It didn't resemble that many first dates I had watched in movies. People always wanted to get to know each other more. Likes and dislikes and every other thing. I withheld these things from him while we were friends because I wanted it to be what we discussed on our first date. When he didn't say anything after a while, I ignited a conversation. I asked about when he started to like me and why he took so long to ask me out. He didn't say much, just a word or two, so I took over. I talked for a long time, narrating things I loved to do, things I had planned to do with my first boyfriend, the kind of person I was, the kind of things I liked, and so on. He smiled awkwardly with every sentence I uttered, nodding his head like he was forced, or like someone held it and pushed it forward and back at every interval. It didn't make me tired, though. I was too excited to be brought down by the disinterest evident in his eyes. I didn't come too far to turn back then. Although I longed to know what was wrong, I wanted to know why he asked me on a date if he wasn't going to speak or eat his food like a normal person. I even made a mental note to talk to Ashley, my best friend, if all first dates were awkward because they were first dates. She had been on numerous dates all her life and was bound to have a lot of experience. Also, I planned to tell her about my date after it happened, killing two birds with one stone. The dinner was over in no time. I hooked arms with him, Lucas, and he disengaged our arms while staring apologetically at the untethered crowd in the restaurant. The gesture annoyed me so much that I shot him a terrifying look and stormed out of the restaurant. He rushed after me and reached me just as soon as I reached his car, the same one with which he brought us to the restaurant. "What was that in there?" I asked as soon as he was close enough to hear. I'm sorry, Kate. I thought some people might recognize us. It'll be weird." My insides boiled. Anger completely overshadowed the excitement I managed to feel all day. I saw this coming. I knew that one day he would turn on me because of what he thought others would say. But he needed to understand that the world had lost care for a teacher who took his student on a date. Scratch that. I had graduated. I was no longer his student, and he wasn't my English teacher anymore. It was okay for us to move around in public, even if he was 32 and I was 18. No one cared, and I certainly didn't. If I did, I wouldn't have pushed his girlfriend down the stairs all those years ago when no one was looking. I wouldn't have gotten close to him, soothed his tears, and befriended him. I wouldn't have given him the little note that threatened him to ask me on a date the day I graduated or be forced to face death. I didn't care because I loved him. I loved him from the moment he became my crush. I waited long enough to remove every obstacle. Of course, he didn't have any idea that I did any of this. I walked into his arms and wrapped myself in his embrace. I was glad I wore heels and my voice reached his ears. "You don't have to be nervous around me, Lucas." The sound of his name coming from my lips twisted my insides and made my head travel to forbidden places. "There's no student or teacher relationship between you and me anymore. There's only the love that you and I have for each other. We shouldn't let people get between us." He nodded. I felt it on my back. I felt the loud beating of his heart too. But that meant only one thing to me. My crush was finally mine. It was a successful first date.
I was watching a movie on the living room couch at my ramshackle apartment. I heard a knock at the door. It was strange because it was 10 p.m. and I knew absolutely nobody in town. I had moved to the apartment only 2 months ago after a nasty fight with my parents. I promised never to see them again, so I decided to move as far away from Louisiana as I possibly could, and I found myself in a rundown area in Vegas. Since the apartment was free, a loan from a college friend, till I got my place, I was able to keep saving money I got from an online job as a marketer till I got enough money to leave America. I forced myself off the couch and wobbled to the door. It was my next door neighbor, a crazy hot dude who I never summoned up enough courage to talk to. Each time he tried to say hi, I responded with a bye. Don't judge me, I was quite shy. "Hi," he said. His blue eyes twitched a bit. How cute. "I'm sorry to bother you, but can I stay here for a while?" His blue eyes drew me in, and his soft blonde hair made my fingers tremble. How would it feel to run them through his hair? He was well built, with a beard as blonde as his hair. He was probably athletic. He chuckled with an obvious nervousness as he told me that he knew it sounded strange, but his roommate brought a girl, and he didn't want to witness their stuff. I told him he could come into the house, and it was fine. The way his eyes lit up made me happy with myself. He nodded and said thanks. No, I wanted to say thank you for dragging your hot self to my doorstep. I let him in and shut the door, turning all the locks. Then I remembered that my hair was a mess, but I didn't care. My messy hair and all, I was all shades beautiful. My hot neighbor sat on my couch with his gaze on me. I could feel a little spark. My heart thudded. I had never let a guy into my apartment this time of night, but this dude seemed different. As I said, I was a loner, but I had been in 2 relationships where both guys wanted me to be someone I wasn't, which eventually led to the breakups. I was 21 when I decided to avoid relationships. That was 5 years ago, and I felt that I was ready for one. My neighbor was enough to make my mind up. He asked if I knew how beautiful I was. I offered my thanks and asked him if he wanted me to get him something to drink. While I asked if he preferred coffee or water, he dismissed the gesture and said he was good. He also said that I was enough, and I flinched. I love smooth talkers. I chuckled and sat next to him. I told him my name, Renee, something I had not done in a long time. I loved his name. He said he was Alex, but I hated the next sentence he said, comparing me to his ex. It was nice that he said I was more beautiful, yet that was a weird thing to say, so I dismissed it. The same guy I'd been drooling over for weeks was sitting on my couch and telling me how beautiful I was. How often does that happen? Suddenly, Alex rose from the couch and looked around. I was beginning to feel uncomfortable, but maybe he was just slightly weird. He asked for the kitchen, and I gave him directions, feeling skeptical. Without saying another word, he took a turn into the kitchen. I rose from the couch and followed him. What did he want from my kitchen? I met him searching through the cupboards. 2 of the kitchen drawers were already open. My irritation was obvious when I inquired about what he needed. He didn't say anything, but he kept searching. I folded my arms and watched. Maybe he had seen a rodent. Later, I heard him mumble something, the word perfect. My eyes turned to the object of perfection, and it was my favorite knife. It was perfect. My fingers began to quake. I called his name, and he told me to be calm because he just wanted to tell me a story. I was transfixed. What was I supposed to do in this situation where my crush was turning into a monster? It made no sense, even after he said he wouldn't hurt me. It made 0 sense as he commanded me to sit on a bar stool close to the kitchen counter. I had no other choice. I sat and quivered as he sat next to me. I had a girlfriend, Renee. She was my world. We had been friends since middle school, and we dated throughout high school and our sophomore years in college. She was very beautiful, Renee. Very beautiful. Things were going fine for us. We were going to get married and have 3 kids after college. But everything changed that day I met her in her dorm room, on the bed with her slit wrists. She looked so beautiful, so peaceful. The sheets were soaked in red. She was dead. She left no note, nothing. I never knew why she died. She was the most beautiful girl I had ever met, even in death. But I have a question, Renee. Why are you more beautiful? He frowned and toyed with the knife. I pleaded with him to drop the knife. His cry was loud as he asked again why I was more beautiful than Haley. I figured Haley was the name of his ex. He cried actual tears. I started to cry too. It seemed like I was about to be killed for being more beautiful than someone's ex. I pleaded, but he banged the counter and told me to shut up. His next words confirmed my thoughts. I have to kill you. You are more beautiful, and I must not love you. I muttered that he didn't have to love me. I cried that I would leave. That wouldn't help either of us, Renee. Your face is plastered in my mind. It haunts me day and night. It makes me forget about Haley. You are so beautiful, Renee. I couldn't die like this. I asked him not to forget Haley, that I would move far away. It won't work. It just won't work, he cried. I followed you from Louisiana. You're a witch, and you must die. You want to take Haley from me. Then he smiled. I think you're very beautiful. The knife went up and then down. I felt a humming pain on my wrist as blood dripped on the floor. My vision blurred and my head felt light. I fell off the bar stool onto the dirty kitchen floor. The last thing I saw was my hot neighbor, smiling with tears pouring down his face. Then the world slowly started to fade away. I would never see my parents again. I was finally leaving America. I woke up, alive. My parents were around me in the hospital. Apparently, Alex's roommate had alerted the cops. They came in and they saved my life. But Alex was missing. To this day, I haven't heard any news of him being caught. Scared to the core, I moved back in with my parents. I can't wait for the day that I will finally leave America.
The night had a dizzying aura to it. The swirling tip of cigarette smoke swirling across the desk that separated me from the bartender as he whipped a cocktail for a customer who sat 2 seats to my right. The heavy air of nostalgia that always returned with every Halloween made me aware of all the motions in the room. I turned my neck to face the small dais at the center of the bar, and there she was, the singer, crooning into the night, like an angel recounting a debauched incident of sex on a beach. I fancy no one took too much notice of me, as I did of the room. I enjoyed the anonymity well enough. It served its purpose. My mind rallied back to the present, latching onto the bartender's finger around the cup as he wound the tall, shaking cup around and finally settled the drink in front of the customer. Perhaps she did not notice it, but his left little finger had a plaster around the cuticle. I tucked my left little fingernail away instinctively and grappled my drink from the base. I pushed the tip of the glass to my mouth and took a swig of the alcohol. It burnt down my throat with a sting. When I returned my gaze to the table, she was staring at me. I blushed. "I fancy you enjoy your own company more than most people do," she said to me, pressing for a conversation which I had not known to allow before she spoke. Her body was turned to face me in rapt attention. "That's Halloween. Some time for reflection, maybe," I said back to her with a smile on the left corner of my face. Introspective. I like that. "So what are you supposed to be tonight?" she asked, her brows jutting up her forehead and causing it to crease. No, buddy, just me," I replied. "Can you guess what I am, then?" she asked. She bobbed her hair over her shoulder and simpered as I assessed her briefly. I looked over my shoulder, and the room was distracted by the events of the evening. The only attention we got was from the bartender, who eavesdropped subtly. He looked familiar, but I would never mention it to her. I squinted as I drew in as much of her features as I could. She had an artificial brow attached to her face, loose and unkempt. But she had the better habit of making sure her hair was well tended to. It was thick and ginger. But her eyes were different colors, one green and the other blue. She affected some wrinkles on her face, which I considered well done. Her lips had a maroon stain on the side, drawn to resemble a blood-stained canvas. It was strange, but I had no idea what it was. I don't think I do," I answered truthfully. "Maggie the drunk," she blurted. Her eyes lit up with such fascination when she spoke. "I don't think I know who that is," I replied, feeling the heat of the alcohol starting to pool back into my mouth. "She's a figure from the old world. They say she would seize children who strayed too far from home, and when she had them, she would slit their throats with a small pick, just enough to get some blood, and then drink of it until those little pricks would turn white." She giggled jocularly, managing her attention between myself and the bartender. "And you, what are you supposed to be?" she added, questioning him. I turned to my drink and stirred in silence with my ears pitched to hear what he had to say. "Richard Combs. Heard a podcast about him from the internet. They say he's on the loose. A serial killer with no pattern. Scary, isn't it?" the bartender said, fascinated with his own narration as he was with telling the subject of the story. "I wouldn't know him," she said dismissively, and threw her hands in the air as she took a sip of her drink. I'd had enough of the night, and I took the last of my drink just before sliding the bartender his tip of $10 for the night. I belched the alcohol crudely and stood up for the night without attention for the rest of bargoers. The breeze was gentle on my face when I stepped out of the bar that evening, and I felt a powerfulness that overwhelmed me. I felt alive. I recognized the rush and knew I had to satisfy it even as I made my way to the car. There was only so much I could do in such a place as this where I was new in, I thought to myself as I devised a new plan for my week ahead. I marched to my car with the thoughts swirling in my head, distracting me from finding my car, when I heard the faint whisper from behind. I shuddered in the dark as I looked around to find bare nothingness in my trail. The bar was at least 3 minutes from where I stood. Still, it felt like a distant island to me when I was stranded at sea. I walked backwards briefly, and just as I turned around, the ginger-haired costume was before me. "What are the odds that you're being stalked by someone who wants the taste of your blood on her tongue right now?" she asked rhetorically. I looked around and twitched. We were all alone. The feeling of powerfulness surged in me, pumping my muscles and causing my veins to spasm with a sudden rush of blood. "I would place them very high," she said to me as she moved in with a small knife in her fingers. I said nothing. I could not. I was already pale with breathlessness, and my nose was hot with anticipation as I stared into her eyes to see her carelessness. I felt my head spin, and I lost my own consciousness like one possessed to speak. "Ha ha ha," she bucked into a chuckle. "Look at you, almost white with dread. You should see your eyes. I was just kidding." "May I see your knife?" I said to her as she moved closer. "Sure," she said and handed over the knife to me. "My name's Maggie. Reason for the choice on Halloween. What's yours?" My eyes lit up. "Richard Combs." "Who?" she asked, suddenly curious. "Richard Combs," I said, slipping my left hand from the dark to have a firm grip on the knife. I tucked the knife quickly into my hand and placed my plastered finger on the base. Oh God, no!" she cried when she saw the look on my face. I grabbed her arm before she could turn. The fury in my veins flooded my face, and I was red with rage before I could put a lid on my emotions. I dug the knife straight into the left side of her neck and pulled it across. I withdrew the knife from her neck before I realized what I had done. The alarm jilted me from sleep. I arose from the bed in a hurry and checked the time. Another alarm beeped almost immediately. The tone of the alarm was enough to let me know what day it was. I hate Halloween. I hate the memory that comes with it. I hate that my neighbors always report the flickering lights and sparks that happen in their house every Halloween. Maybe because it once happened to me, too. People say Halloween is a time when bad or evil spirits are ushered out of the world into their realms. But it seemed evil decided to visit me the last time things were good. It was a tricky visit on Halloween 2 years ago. It started with rain. The rain wasn't exactly regular, but the forecast predicted showers, so it didn't come as a surprise. I didn't always hate Halloween. I was a very big fan of the parties, trick-or-treat games, pumpkin decorations, and the masks that came with them. When my parents permitted me to be a part of the school's organized Halloween masked party, of course I was elated. That evening, just before it was time for the party, I decided to catch my favorite show. And that's when the rain started. And my dad was in the bathroom getting ready for an outing he had with my mom. I had no idea where they were going, and I didn't think it was my business either. My mom was loading the washing machine or, doing some housework that was of no concern to me. I was glued to the television, too focused to realize that the rain had gone from light showers to a heavy thunderstorm. I didn't notice until the light in the sitting room flickered. It was weird. My body shuddered with the continuous flickering of the light. The frequency rhymed with the thunder. The ground trembled. The My heart sank at the possibility that the rain would disturb my party and outing. It didn't make sense that heavy rain was falling. The light flickers intensified. The television also flashed on and off. I hugged myself tightly in my seat, resisting the urge to call my parents. I was 16, too old for that. Just like every other person would be, I was scared. Outside, the house trembled and every corner of the house shook. The chairs vibrated in their space, and I wondered why the weather was putting in so much effort. I wanted the rain to stop, but it got louder and harsher. At some point, a rumble of thunder caused the television to go off, and the entire house was thrown into darkness too. In a few seconds, the light came back on, almost like it never left. But it was accompanied by loud shrieks. Trembling, I stood up from the chair. "Mom? Dad?" I called, but got no responses. My mind swayed to the shriek and scream I heard. The one sounded like the voice of a woman. I strangely thought it belonged to my mother. She had a unique voice, tiny and high-pitched. People loved to say that I looked so much like her, especially because of her blonde hair and voice, but I didn't want it to be my mother's voice. That would only mean one thing. Something was wrong. The other voice sounded masculine, and I could swear that it was from the bathroom. I couldn't help but wonder if my mom and dad made the noise at the same time because of the blackout, but I realized it couldn't be. The noise didn't come from the blackout, it came after, and I didn't want it to be them. I traced my footsteps across the ground and found myself headed to the bathroom, the one my father used. I dragged each step, and the fear that was settled in my heart intensified. The rain still fell, and the thunder still shook the house at intervals. I didn't make it there first because at the corner of the kitchen, my mom lay at the base of the open freezer. She resembled bones covered with a thin layer of flesh. A scream erupted from my lungs, and I ran back to the sitting room. It couldn't be my mother. I took even slower steps back into the kitchen, still in denial. The closer I went, the clearer it became that the one in the kitchen was indeed my mother. I stopped myself from screaming and ran from my lifeless mother to the destination I had in mind in the first place. The bathroom was quiet and still. I started to cry. What was going on? My head could barely wrap around the fact that my mother was only bones and flesh. My fisted palms banged hard on the door of the toilet. Blood rushed in my brain as I anticipated the response of my father. "Dad!" I shouted many times. When I didn't get a response after what seemed like a long time, I tried to twist the doorknob, and it bent in my hands. I opened the door. My dad didn't always lock the door whenever he went to the toilet or bathroom. My mom had complained many times, but he never listened. My legs shook as I entered the bathroom. "Dad?" I called again, but stopped. It was a pool of blood. My dad was on the floor in a pool of red liquid, his shaving blade in his hands close to his neck. I saw a cut by his chin down to his neck. He was starting to resemble my mother. For the second time that evening, I screamed. My heart was no longer inside me. My brain was dispersed in many directions, trying to find meaning to the tragedy in my house. I found a phone and dialed the emergency number. I willed myself to stay sane. I went back to where my mother lay, unrecognizable. I would have shaken her back to life, but my legs were hooked to the ground, studying her bizarre physique. It couldn't have been a serial killer or an assassin. What could it be? I thought hard and remembered it was Halloween. Was the house haunted by vengeful ghosts? Or did the evil spirits stop by while the rain was heavy? The detectives that appeared sometime later found the answer. Electrical problems. My mom was shocked to death by the electricity when she tried to retrieve something from the freezer that was connected to the power supply. My dad's shaving blade was electrical. He was in the bathroom with water and a power supply colliding. Wasn't a good ending. That's one of the reasons I hate Halloween. I lost all of my family. The other reason is that no heavy rains have fallen since then. It wasn't supposed to fall that day either. It was physics fun when I tampered with the electricity wiring a day before to add special effects to Halloween. The police didn't know that. They didn't need to know that I still tampered with the wiring of the neighbors every Halloween, too. Lucky them that there wasn't a heavy rainstorm. It was around time for our annual guys hunting trip, and we'd already moved into Francis's cabin. It wasn't really a hunting trip per se. In fact, in the 5 years since we'd begun the annual ritual, we had never gone hunting. We would move into the cabin for a few weeks and watch the finals of the Champions League. The cabin belonged to Francis's father. It was more like a man cave than a cabin. It was where he and his friends went to when they needed to get away from their girlfriends and people in general when they were younger. But since he got married, the cabin had begun to see little use till we started using it. It was only a cabin due to the lack of a better name for a luxury wooden structure in the woods. It was a 2-story palace. The exterior was styled to resemble a mansion, but without the cold, stony look. The cabin had Wi-Fi and cable television. The living room was large and stylishly furnished with imported rugs and couches, and the walls were adorned with the heads of game animals. It had a kitchen, a study, 3 separate bathrooms, and 4 bedrooms. It was like living in a 5-star hotel. We went there to avoid the distractions that were bound to be at home if we watched the games with our girlfriends and fiancés. We would stay a couple more days after the games were over and then come home. We kept the location secret from our girls so as to prevent them from making any surprise visits. We knew they didn't believe us whenever we said we were going hunting. After all, it was difficult to hunt wild animals without hunting gear, which we never had. And we never had pictures of what we caught, only stories we made up on the way home. We got to the cabin towards the evening. We weren't in a hurry since none of the matches would begin till later in the night. We expected the cabin to be a bit dusty, like it usually was, and because Andrew was allergic, we usually had to carry out a little bit of light dusting. But there wasn't as much dust as you would expect from a house that had not been used for a little over a year. I guess that saves us from doing a little spring cleaning, Francis said happily as he carried his bags up the stairs and into his room. We both shrugged and did the same. "Hey, Francis," Andrew called out from his own room. "Yeah?" Francis yelled back at us. "Was someone here other than us?" "No, not that I know of. Why?" "There are some clothes in the closet here." "Maybe you left them there the last time we came," Francis suggested. "No, I don't think so," Andrew responded. "They're not even mine." "Are they large?" "Yeah, large and styleless." "They could belong to my cousin," Francis chuckled. "He knows about the cabin. He comes once in a blue moon to hunt," Francis explained. "Oh, okay." "He's probably the one who's done some dusting," I yelled down the hall since I'd been listening to their conversation. "Yeah, that's what I just realized too," Francis said. We finished unpacking our bags and huddled together in the living room with cans of beer as we waited for the match to start. The match had barely started when the entire house plunged into darkness. "Come on!" we all yelled in unison. "Francis, what was that?" Andrew asked, annoyed. "I don't know. Maybe we blew a fuse or something. The building isn't exactly well maintained," Francis replied, annoyed. "Since you're so concerned, why don't you go check the flipper? It's in the basement." "Fine. Where's my phone?" Andrew turned on the torch on his phone and proceeded to the basement, grumbling and annoyed that he was currently missing parts of the game. "Where's the damn thing?" he shouted angrily from the basement. "It's to the left, on the far side of the wall," Francis shouted back. "Hope you're not scared of the boogeyman," Francis said, laughing. "Shut up," Andrew replied. A few minutes passed, and power had not yet been restored to the house. "Andrew, what's going on down there?" I asked him, wondering what was taking him so long. "Just a minute. There's a little bit of dust down here. I have to be careful," he replied. "Should we come help?" "Nah, I can manage." Francis and I continued to wait patiently. "Guys, can you come and see this?" Andrew called. We rushed down to the basement to see what was up. "Look," Andrew said as he pointed with his phone's light. "That couldn't be nice, right?" The cabin had not blown a fuse. The wire had been slashed in two. The cut was too big and too clean to have been from mice. "Someone slashed the cables," Francis said, alarmed. "Who could have done it?" I asked. "The doors are locked, and we're the only ones in the house." "You sure it wasn't just mice?" I asked, knowing full well that it wasn't mice. "Is someone in the house with us?" Andrew asked, starting to feel a little bit frightened. "What if," he started to say, when the floor creaked heavily as someone leaped at him from out of the darkness. Francis swung his phone in time, and the light from his torch momentarily blinded the assailant, making the large hunting knife he had swung at his neck miss. Instead of slicing through Francis's neck, the blade made a diagonal slash across his face instead. Francis winced and staggered backward. Before the intruder could right himself, I barreled into him and caught his jaw with my shoulder, knocking him down. Andrew helped Francis up, and we ran out of the basement and locked the door. "What the fuck was that?" I asked them, my chest heaving. "Did you see that guy?" They had not really seen him. He was short and stocky, and had really long hair. His beard was massive, and his bare chest was huge and hairy. "There was blood on his face," I said. "What?" they asked me. "There was dried blood on his face. You guys didn't smell it?" I asked. "Smell what? You're not making any sense," Andrew said as he went into the kitchen to get the first aid kit. "The basement had a weird smell, like raw meat. When I knocked him down, my torch caught a dead deer on the floor," I explained to them. "I think he'd been eating it." "What?" Andrew asked as he came back with a wet cloth and gauze for Francis's face. The basement didn't have any other exit, so we were sure he wouldn't be able to escape. "We need to call the police," Francis said with a grimace. Suddenly, an Axehead came crashing through the basement door. "We need to call them now!" he yelled. We couldn't use our phones. There wasn't any cell reception all the way out here. That was why the cabin had landlines, but the lunatic in the basement had slashed those wires as well. "We can't call the police without power. We need to leave," Andrew said in fear as he began searching for his car keys. He found it, and we all began running to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Had the lunatic snuck past us and locked the door somehow? I ran to the kitchen to check the back door and saw that it had been locked too. We couldn't go through the windows either. Metal protectors had been installed on them because of the wild animals. "We're trapped," I announced in alarm. "Both doors are locked." "Shit," Andrew said. The thick basement door was nearing splinters by now. "What are we gonna do?" I asked no one in particular. "I think my dad kept a satellite phone in his study," Francis said. As we ran past the basement to the study, the door finally came crashing down just as Andrew was going through. The man swung his axe at Andrew. His short stature didn't offer him enough reach, and his swing did not cut as deep as he had intended, but it still managed to leave a huge gash in Andrew's chest. Blood seeped out and darkened his shirt. The swing made him lose his phone, and the corridor went dark. I shone my light down the hall to see the man standing over Andrew with his axe raised, and I realized that the man's eyes were well adjusted to the darkness. He didn't need light to see us. The light from my phone blinded him and offered Andrew the opportunity to crawl close enough for Francis to pull him into the study and lock the door. "Andrew, are you okay?" I asked him. He was bleeding profusely, and his pupils had begun to dilate. "What do you want?" I shouted outside the door, knowing the man was still out there. He didn't say anything, but responded with an axe into the door. The study door wasn't nearly as thick as the basement door. It wouldn't take as much effort to break this one down. Francis was already going through the drawers in the study looking for the satellite phone. "I found it," he announced after he found it. "I hope it still works." Thankfully it did, and he turned it on. The door was nearly gone by now, and I looked around the room for something I could use to defend us. Andrew had lost too much blood and he could barely stand. I pulled him into the far corner of the room to hide. The only objects I could find were a paperweight and a blunt leather opener. There was an old hunting rifle on the wall, but I doubted it would be loaded, or if it worked. Francis was on the phone, and the door crashed open and the stocky man flew in. I threw the paperweight at his head, which he effortlessly dodged and lunged at me. He was heavy and knocked me down. Before I could get myself up, I felt a sharp pain in my neck as his teeth sank into it. I cried out in pain and stabbed him in the side with the letter opener. He didn't grunt or grimace. Instead, his teeth loosened around my neck and immediately sank into the hand that held the opener. I heard a loud crack, and he rolled off of me and immediately sat back up. And blood splattered everywhere. Francis stood over him with the hunting rifle. Smoke was still oozing from the barrel. He had called the police and had come to help me. It took a while, but the police and ambulance finally arrived. Andrew survived, and we never went back to the cabin again. The police identified the intruder. He had gone off the grid and began to live in the woods. He had eventually lost his mind and began to behave like an animal. He most likely marked the cabin as his territory and sought to defend it. Oh, how I always liked going to the movies. Since I was a kid, especially during holidays. For Christmas, I would go see every movie that had to do with Santa, reindeer, or presents. Around Easter, I was the first one in line at the cinema to see in what kind of trouble a cartoon bunny would get into. And of course, when Halloween came around, I enjoyed a horror classic. What does this have to do with the story? Well, I'm about to tell you about what happened to me the last time I went to the movies during Halloween. Right around that time, about last year, a brand new Freddy Krueger movie came out. Yeah, I know it may sound corny that they would do a reboot of such a well-known character, but I didn't mind. That morning, as the movie arrived at my local cinema, I called up two of my best friends, Jordan and Tom. Hey guys, you know that movie I talked about? It's out. We're going tonight. I bought tickets. Luckily, my friends were bigger nerds than I was, so of course they liked the idea. I got the tickets for the evening show so that it would feel scarier. At around 8 p.m., we were waiting in line. Seemed like the entire town wanted to see that movie. We got in, got lots of popcorn and sodas, and took our seats. As I looked around, everyone in there looked so excited to see the movie. I even saw about 5 people dressed as Freddy Krueger. Damn, I wish I would have thought of that, I said as the commercial started. Not long after that, the movie began, and I felt like a kid again. The same atmosphere took over me. And sure enough, the first victim died at the claws of Freddy Krueger. Everyone in the theater, especially Jordan and Tom, were really living the moment. And with every slash and every spill of blood, we would go, "Oh!" Well, almost everyone. There's something you don't know about me. I would always analyze the people around me. It was like a pet peeve of mine. I love to see the expressions on people's faces each time they would be scared or happy. So normally, when the gruesome scenes happened, I would check out their reaction. But there was one dude who didn't seem fazed by any of it. He was a couple of rows behind me, and there was no one next to him on either side. I found him intriguing, so I kept looking at him from time to time. After every scene that would normally bring out a reaction in everyone, he would have a poker face. It was like he didn't enjoy the movie. I kept thinking, why did he come here? Anyway, after the movie ended, we decided to go and get something to eat. There were kids running around everywhere, and they had the most amazing costumes. Much better than anything I would have during my childhood. Me, Jason, and Tom found a local coffee shop that still had some empty tables. We went in, I ordered a burger, but something caught my eye. I looked up, and a couple tables down, there he was, alone, drinking a cup of black coffee. It was the guy from the movies that didn't seem bothered by anything that went on. He was still wearing his Freddy Krueger costume. He had a hat, striped shirt, and even had a glove with blades on it, similar to Freddy. How did he get in both of their dreams at the same time? It's just wild, Jason said while I took a bite out of my burger. I know, right? Anyway, the movie was awesome. Too bad it only lasted 2 hours, Tom replied. Hey guys, I gotta go to the bathroom. think I had a little bit too much soda at the movies, I told my friends before getting up from the table. I went into the bathroom, unzipped my pants, and, well, I did my business. After that, naturally, I went to wash my hands. At that exact moment, the guy who I saw at the cinema came in. I saw him in the mirror as he walked behind me. "Hey, I saw you at the Freddy Krueger movie. Pretty cool, huh?" I said. But he didn't reply. I saw that he wasn't going to use the bathroom. He stood behind me, before crouching down, putting his entire weight on one knee. Maybe he was tying his shoelace, I couldn't see. I dried off my hands with a paper towel and threw it in the trash. "Yeah, anyway, your costume's awesome. Looks so realistic. And those blades look like they could cut something," I said while laughing. Seeing that he didn't respond, yet again, I walked toward the door. But right before I had my hand on the doorknob, I felt something wrap around my neck, pulling me back. I fell to the floor and I couldn't breathe. My airways were being obstructed and my vision started to get blurry. The guy, earlier when he crouched down, was taking off his shoelace, only to use it to choke me. I struggled and tried to escape. I even hit him in the face with the back of my head, but he still wouldn't let go. The shoelace was so tight around my neck that I couldn't make enough space between it and my skin so I could jam my fingers in there. "Help!" I tried to utter, but the fact that my entire body was deprived of oxygen made it harder and harder for me to move or try to do anything to get out of that situation. At that moment, I thought that was it. It was my time to go. In a coffee shop bathroom, on a dirty bathroom floor, murdered by some psychopath with a shoelace. I accepted my fate. I don't know why, but I just gave in and closed my eyes. A ringing in my ears started, and it wasn't long until I would pass out and ultimately die. But something made me snap out of that state and open my eyes. "Hey, let him go!" I heard. It was Tom. He needed the bathroom and stumbled upon me, almost dying. He kicked the guy in the head, and that made him release the shoelace. I rolled around, gasping for air, while Tom was fighting the dude. And when I told him that those blades look real, well, I was right. Because while on my knees trying to recover, I saw the whole thing. The guy slashed Tom's stomach, and immediately the floor got covered in blood. Tom fell to his knees, pressing on the wound with his hands. The guy tried to run out of the bathroom. Right when he opened the door and took a step out, I grabbed his back leg. "Help! He's armed! He cut my friend!" I yelled. Everyone looked at us, not knowing what to do. The guy kicked me in the head and I released his leg. He ran out the door of the coffee shop in a matter of a few seconds. "Call an ambulance," I told them. Jason came into the bathroom and he tried to stop the bleeding. The medics arrived in a couple of minutes, but the wound was pretty bad. Tom was rushed to the hospital, and we spent the entire night there, drinking coffee and waiting for the doctor to tell us that it'll be all right. "Hello?" I said. "Mr. Mayers, this is Officer Pollock from the police," he said. I was summoned to the station. They think they may have caught the guy. I told Jason, and then I left. Then, as I walked in, I was escorted into another room. "Is this him?" they asked me. I immediately recognized him. He didn't have his blades anymore. I assume he ditched them, but that was definitely him. The police officer then told me that the guy was wanted for no less than 5 murders. They were trying to find him for some time, and that I was lucky I got off of that incident alive. "Yeah, but my friend isn't doing so well," I told them. Immediately after that, I got a call from Jason. He told me Tom was fine, but asleep, and we should let him rest for the night. As I walked out of that room and stepped into the hallway, the murderer was also there, handcuffed, sitting on a chair. "This is not over, movie boy. I'll cut your throat one day. Believe me," he said, before smiling, revealing a silver tooth. That image will remain with me for as long as I live. Even now that I think about it, I get goosebumps.